See, there have been moments like this before, moments that have started movements all throughout history. In 1948, an all-white government came to power in the country of South Africa. This government passed laws that would openly discriminate and ultimately sought to destroy an entire race in South Africa. But the people of South Africa began to rise up. In 1976, in the city of Soweto, students did too. Students took to the streets to stand for the way they were being instructed. Peacefully, they marched through the streets to stand for what they knew was right. The police opened fire. Some died. But their stand started a ripple effect, and other student groups around the country began to rise up too. Apartheid laws ended in 1991, and free elections were held in 1994. In the 1960s, slavery was not legal in the United States, but Jim Crow laws still ruled much of the South. Restrooms were labeled by color, restaurants had white-only and black-only sections. Schools were still labeled as white schools and black schools. In 1960, the civil rights movement had gained momentum. In February, 4 college students decided they didn't need to sit at the blacks-only counter. They went to Woolworth's general store and asked for coffee at the whites-only lunch counter. They were never served. This was the first of what became known as the sit-in movement. It began with college students and high school students, and it would eventually lead to the Freedom Rider movement. Students rised up to challenge status quo. In Pakistan and in other parts of the world, women did not receive education beyond middle school. As a 13-year-old, Malala Yousafzai saw this injustice and could not sit idle. She began to blog for the BBC and told the world of the injustice she was experiencing. Her message began to gain traction, and the Taliban began issuing threats. In October of 2012, she was shot by a gunman on her way to school. She survived. After many surgeries and recovery efforts, Malala was invited to give a speech before the United Nations in 2013, when she was 16. She urged them to change their perspective on education of girls and women's rights. Malala became the youngest person to ever receive a Nobel Peace Prize. She received it in 2014. She was 17. All of these movements started with a moment where something shifted and caused a movement. The wave of impact these moments created are much like the wave of a tsunami. These have the power to change everything around them. Tsunami waves can travel for hundreds of miles over the surface of the ocean. They can change coastlines in a minute. And sometimes the initial impact isn't the most powerful impact. But every tsunami starts with an earthquake. What will the power of these moments be this week at camp? What will the ripple effect of our time together in this space? What will coastlines change because of the stirring and the rumble that is coming? The uprising is coming. The earthquake is beginning. This wave is forming. The time has come for a generation to stand to its feet and raise the banner. Opportunity has presented itself to be the beacon of hope in the midst of darkness. It is time for a generation of students to recognize the injustice, to see the issues of the world and not step down to the level of our society, not step aside from facing things head on. It is time for a generation to drop the weight of all the things the world uses to disqualify them. It's time for a generation to identify the value placed upon them. It's time for a generation to step up to the plate because there is no one else rising to the challenge. It's time for a generation of students who rise up and declare, for the whole world to hear and all the world to see, there is a kingdom that is greater, that there is a Savior who is higher, and there is a hope that is sure. It's time for the people of Jesus to start an uprising. Are you in?